Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle, the show that the Future of Freedom Foundation brings to you to share with you a libertarian perspective on the burning issues of the day. And I'm joined, as I am every week, by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Wonderful to be back in the new year. It's a little cold, even down in the Charleston, South Carolina area, but it's always a pleasure to be spending some time with our viewers and listeners.
Yes, well, you'll bring us some hot air. You get it?
Duh.
Okay, well, speaking of hot air, let's talk about the latest controversy, well, not surprisingly, surrounding the president, Donald Trump, and that's on immigration. And I thought, when I was thinking about that maybe we ought to do this show on the immigration controversy, the latest one, is that I would title the show, The Immigration Circus Comes to Town. Because it is, Richard. I mean, it's just another great big circus. I mean, all the brouhaha and the controversy and the scandal over, Donald Trump's latest pronouncements, which he denies making apparently, dealing with a sort of an off-color word, asterisk, whole, referring to countries like Haiti and African countries, and suggestions that we don't want immigrants from those countries. We would prefer the immigrants from countries like Norway and so forth. But I mean, it's just, and then of course, all of Trump's critics are coming out of the woodwork, and now the big debate is Donald Trump a racist because of what he says here. And I mean, Richard, putting things in a larger context, it really is just standard fare for the whole immigration controversy. I mean, I've been, as you know, I was born and raised on the Texas-Mexican border on a farm there on the Rio Grande, and so I've seen this ongoing immigration controversy my entire life. It's just sometimes it bursts to the surface, other times it subsides, but it's really been one gigantic circus where you've got a constant crisis, constant chaos, constant controversies like you have today, and hardly anyone puts things in perspective and asks some real fundamental questions like, why is there this ongoing crisis? I mean, isn't that kind of bizarre that you've got this situation where the crisis never goes away? And the assumption always is that there's some kind of solution to the crisis. If the government can just come up with the right comprehensive reform plan. I mean, I love that phrase. And the media always says, well, if only Congress would come up with a comprehensive reform package. Well, the point is that there is no solution to this as far as trying to make this system, which is really a system of governmental controls, immigration controls. That the assumption is that there's like some kind of magic formula out there, but notice that some 60 years of chaos and crisis, nobody's come up with the plan. I mean, even if you ask the biggest proponent of immigration controls, well, give me your plan. He can't ever tell you what his plan is. The media says, well, Congress needs to get involved in this and come up with a comprehensive reform package. Really, what is that? What is your ideal plan? And they never do. And the reason is, as you know, because there is no comprehensive reform plan, that you've got an inherently defective system. And that system is immigration controls itself. It's a system of socialist central planning. It's inherently defective, just like central planning was defective in the Soviet Union. And it just simply cannot be made to work. And so sometimes people look at us libertarians and say, oh, you guys are so impractical. You favor open borders. And well, what's impractical about favoring something that works? Seems to me the most impractical thing is devoting money, time, and energy to a system that is fundamentally and inherently incapable of working. And so to me, the latest controversy, the circus here over whether Donald Trump's a racist, is really besides the point. The point is that regardless of who is deciding, which in the government is deciding how many immigrants from Haiti, how many from Africa, how many from Norway, how many from Mexico, it's going to be chaos, what Mises called planned chaos, more crisis, more circus. What do you think?
Well, I think there's several perspectives from which we can try to look at this. One is the United States is an area of free migration. That is, there are no immigration barriers, restrictions, quotas, or visas between the 50 states. An American who's been living in Maine in the Northeast can freely pick up and move to Arizona or to Washington State or Oregon or Wyoming or Colorado or Texas or Florida or. Nobody worries or is concerned about too many people moving into Utah or too many people leaving Illinois. Governments sometimes do, but because of their own irrational regulatory and tax policies influencing their tax bases if people leave. But I'm talking about the type of issues that most people think about. Well, how do we know who's coming into Oregon and where are they coming from? For example, I now live in South Carolina. And traditionally, South Carolina has been a more conservative state. Conservative sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way, but what usually is meant by the political conservative. But because of certain advantages of living and working in South Carolina compared to more heavily regulated and heavily taxed other parts of the country, particularly the Northeast and the Midwest, there has been a huge inflow of people from, let's say, Massachusetts, New York, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, and so on. And I often joke that you have all of these left of center liberal Democrats and socialist sympathizers arriving in South Carolina. Perhaps we need a wall, a huge wall at the South Carolina-North Carolina border, and to make Massachusetts pay for it. But the fact is that people come here, and people have different political views, different cultural attitudes, whether you're in New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, Dallas, Texas, or Charleston, South Carolina. And people find jobs, they support their families, and so on. And we don't worry about that. Obviously, you have personal preferences and likes and dislikes running a gambit of reasonable to irrational, but we don't worry about that. We figure that people are moving to where opportunity is suggesting itself or preference dictates in terms of liking a warmer climate or a skiing area. And we just go with that, and we don't worry about it. But there's this idea that because of this lines drawn on a global map, this is the United States, this is Canada, this is Mexico, this is France, this is Japan, this is Vietnam, et cetera, that somehow this makes a difference. Now, the United States, while people poo-poo it and they often view it as a cliche, America is a melting pot of multitudes of different nationalities, ethnicities, and cultures. Whether they be of a European Caucasian or Asian or African or Latin American, we are a melting pot. Now, people have sometimes had private prejudices in which they have resented, disliked, or felt uncomfortable. But the advantage of the United States through most of its history was that immigration was either open or relatively freer, and there was no state-sponsored discrimination or barriers for most people entering and wishing to work in the United States. So people came together, different backgrounds, different educations, different cultures, different attitudes, different belief systems, and we are the beneficiaries of that. I would just ask the viewers and listeners to ask themselves, where did your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-great-grandparents come from? And now follow these trees. And you find that over several generations, if some came from Ireland, they just didn't marry Irish people through the following generations, or Italians or Germans, or people from Mexico never married someone from either Europe or another part of Latin America. So there's been all this intermingling culturally, ethnically, and racially. And we are a stronger country from it. It has had no negative effects, but has strengthened us, made us a truly diverse and, in not the usual political meaning of it, a multicultural society. Now, what has undermined this, of course, is the politics of collectivism and statism that has attempted to then use the power of government to serve special interest groups of various and sundry types, appealing, pandering, confusing the issues of how we should view America and Americans. But the fact is we have been made stronger because of these waves of immigration. And each wave has experienced similar attitudes. Oh my gosh, the Irish and the Poles are coming. Well, they're all drunks and they worship the Pope. They can't be real Americans. Or Germans. I mean, they seem to always be sort of nitpicky, hard to get along with, listening to that Germanic pa music. Those damn Germans. And we can go down the list. But the fact is that all of these people become part of America. America is made slightly different because of the immersion of different groups and cultures and peoples and experiences, but it has also strengthened us. It is what has made us this example of brilliance for the rest of the world. Again, there have always been stupid people who have stupid ideas and have been irrational in their attitudes, views, and conduct towards others. There were stupid people 1,000 years ago. There are stupid people today. And if we don't blow ourselves up or we'll smash into the sun, there'll be stupid people 1,000 years from now. But the fact is that we have been made stronger by this. And I'll just make one other point, Jacob, if I can, because I assume we'll talk a little bit more about it. And that is the economics of it. The fact is that if you read the Declaration of Independence, the founding fathers, after talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as their rationale for breaking off from the British Empire, enumerated their grievances against the British Crown and the Parliament. And one of their grievances was the British government's attempt to restrict immigration into the 13 colonies. In other words, prevent people from arriving. The original colonists wanted more people to come, to intensify the division of labor, to be able to expand and have a more diverse economy, to bring in more productive people of multitudes of different skills and abilities that would raise everybody's standards of living. And we have forgotten that. There was huge waves of immigration in the second half of the 19th century, when, to be honest, except for emerging immigration restrictions against some Asian groups, specifically Japanese and Chinese, America, up until the end of the 19th century, practically to the First World War, was basically an open immigration country. And what happened during that period? Well, following the Civil War, that was America's Industrial Revolution. Before the Civil War, we were predominantly light industry agricultural country. And we had huge capital investment, and we had this massive inflow of literally millions upon millions of immigrants into the United States. And they supplied the hands to work with the industrial manufacturing that was developing and being invested in. And standards of living went up by well over 50%. By people of skill, medium skill, and low skill, all finding their niche to enhance the productive ability of everyone else in society. Now, of course, nobody likes to face competition in their sector of the market. But the fact is that at the end of the day, competition strengthens us, both as consumers and even as, in the long run, as producers ourselves, by making better goods, less expensive goods, more available goods, improved goods. And with every mouth that comes into the United States comes two hands to help do this. So whether it be the cultural aspect or the economic aspect or just the general attitude of what is it that historically has made America and is America, the case for free immigration has a very sound footing, in my opinion.
Yeah, you raised some many good points. The point about the American citizen immigrants coming into South Carolina and changing the culture reminds me that the same thing was happening in Texas many years ago when there was the crash on Wall Street and a lot of firms are going out of business. And a lot of the hedge fund guys and investment guys were moving to Texas. And there were signs around Texas saying, "We don't care how you did it in New York." And yeah, they were changing culture. They were coming down and polluting Texas culture. But that's the dynamics of a free society, is that people are free to move and they can bring their ideas and their philosophy. And that's part of living in a free society. And I think your analogy of the domestic United States is absolutely appropriate. You know, in this latest controversy, it's kind of interesting that the left is criticizing Trump for being a racist because he's implying, or at least they're saying he implies, that he doesn't want people from Haiti who are black. Well, then, so you ask these critics, well, then I presume then that you want to eliminate immigration controls on people from Haiti? And they immediately respond, oh, no, no, no. We have to have immigration controls. We don't want too many Haitians to come in. And, of course, my question is, why not? I mean, if you think they're great people, why not everybody come that wants to come? And they say, well, you have to have a limit on the number. And a number of any people from any country. You see, and there's where the central planning comes in, is that how does the central planner know what the right number is? I mean, in a free market, you let the market decide that, supply and demand. And your point is right on when you say, well, look, there's the danger that everybody could in the United States could suddenly decide to move from their state across borders to New York City. I mean, just think. Everybody could move to New York City overnight. What would happen? The whole United States would be empty. Well, we know that doesn't happen, for one, because a lot of people don't want to move to New York City. They prefer living where they are. And second, that as you start to move into an area, prices start rising. It becomes prohibitively expensive. I mean, this has certainly happened in California. Everybody, I would assume, would find San Francisco a very attractive place to live. But they don't move there, in large part because it's extremely expensive. Well, the same thing works with worldwide movements of people. That most people like where they live. It's very difficult to just pick up and move to another country where, strange language, strange culture. But even those that move here, they look for areas that are low cost oftentimes. Again, supply and demand. That's the dynamics of a market economy, where instead of depending on the central planner to allocate how many people from Haiti, how many people from Mexico, which he can't possibly know, because it's what Friedrich Hayek called the fatal conceit of the central planner, that his pretense of knowledge, that he knows what the right number is, or the qualifications. That's what creates the crisis. That's what produces the labor shortages. That's what produces the pent-up demand to sneak across the border and risk their lives and hire coyotes. Because the planner has miscalculated. He has said, well, there's going to be this certain number of people from Mexico, when in fact there's a huge demand for labor from Mexico. And that's what then causes, the people to circumvent the immigration controls and so forth. But if you let the market regulate this, everything becomes harmonious, the same way it is here in the United States, as you point out. People move from state to state. They find new jobs. Nobody keeps track of it. Nobody paces the floors to think, oh my gosh, what if Utah empties out and ends up without any people? It's because you just have this faith in a market, in a free market, in the free movements of people. And all we have to do is just imagine that same thing applies. As you point on the international borders, as you suggested, the United States lived with borders throughout the 1800s. Now, people often say, oh, open borders means no borders. It's ridiculous. Open border simply means, like we have domestically, that you can cross a state border, you can cross a county border without meeting some government official. Same thing with international borders. Just conceive of it. And this is the way it was in the 1800s. People come into the United States. They don't necessarily have to become an American citizen. Many people didn't. And in the Texas-Mexican, the southwest border, Texas, New Mexico, and so forth, people were free to cross back and forth. And the Mexican citizens retained their citizenship, but they could come over into El Paso, open a business. Nobody cared what their citizenship was. In fact, if there were no immigration controls, Richard, there would be no crisis, because you wouldn't know what the citizenship of the person you were dealing with. It just would not be an issue. The only time it would be an issue is when the election official would be there saying, well, let me look at your citizenship card to make sure you can vote. But otherwise, on a daily basis, no one would know who's a citizen and who isn't, and no one would care. And there wouldn't be this big crisis environment. There would be a peaceful, harmonious situation the same way there is domestically.
Yes. And I just sort of amplify one other thing that I was referring to about this huge migration from other parts of the world into America in the period, let's say, from around 1840 to the First World War in 1914, when, as I said, for all intents and purposes, there was pretty much an open immigration policy. It's estimated by historians that between that time, 1840 and 1914, approximately 65 million people left Europe to settle in other parts of the world. And out of that 65 million people, at least half chose to come to the United States. Now, that's over 30 million people, 33 million people, let's say. Now, if you remember that in America at that time, in the 19th century, America's population by the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, was less than half of what it is now. That represented a huge inflow of, quote, foreigners into America. That is a proportion of the overall then population. And America absorbed it. We are the great-grandchildren, the grandchildren, and the children of those waves of earlier immigrants. And we are the lucky beneficiaries of an earlier system that was either free or freer than the one we have now. We could all ask ourselves, well, if the borders had not been open and our grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents had not had the opportunity to come to America and begin a new life, having a second chance to start over from the old country, where would we be today? Would we even be alive if our ancestors had not been able to come and had died in a war or starved to death or suffered from some terrible political or religious persecution that would have resulted in us having a totally different life given that parentage or not having been born at all? There's all of these factors and influences that we are the lucky beneficiaries of that we don't give attention to. And then let me just say one other thing on this line, if I may, Jacob. And that is, this is literally just skin deep. So some of us have one skin pigmentation, others. That's just the own planless evolution of the human species in different parts of this planet. But there are certain constants that we can easily understand in all human beings. We have logical faculties. We sometimes reason, we're sometimes guided by emotions. And on reflection, all of us feel that we've made wrong choices about reason versus emotion sometimes in our life. We respond to incentives. We try to improve our lives. We think of trying to make a better life for our children and grandchildren. We want peace, and we look for prosperity compared to poverty. All of these are the similar qualities that make us human beings. And if we understand ourselves that way and ignore this, close our eyes and just think of people without colors and understand that we all want the same things and we all can benefit from each other in pursuing our dreams, our ideals, our hopes, our choices of life and purpose and association, we will all be much better as not just Americans, but as human beings who in fact share one planet with other people who, as core human beings, all have basically the same hopes, desires, dreams, attitudes, and motivational aspects of what guides their life. If we remember that and think about that and give it its due attention, then these other things that get focused on in the media, oh, he's a racist, or I love everybody, in that superficial, touchy-feely way that the left uses, we would get far beyond much of this nonsense. We are human beings. With human beings who, whether you believe that it's natural rights or a more utilitarian approach towards the philosophy of freedom, people should be viewed as having rights to their life, their liberty, their right of the pursuit of happiness. And surely happiness includes one useful and important component, and that is to decide where you want to live, where you want to work, where you'd like to live out your days, and with whom you'd like to share that life in choosing the location in which you shall live and go about your business. That is surely part of the principle of liberty.
Yeah, and there's a lot of hypocrisy in here on the left and the right. It's really just us libertarians that carry a consistent moral free market message here. I mean, the left says, oh, we love the poor, needy, and disadvantaged, and they criticize libertarians for wanting to abolish the welfare state system, the system of mandatory charity. They say, oh, you all hate the poor. And yet, look how they treat these immigrants. I mean, when you look at these DACA people, or these 200,000 Salvadorans that are getting ready to be deported, and you see the horror stories where families are getting separated because one spouse is an American and the other isn't. I mean, these are all because of immigration controls themselves that the left supports. Because when you ask them, are you ready to embrace the libertarian position on open immigration? Oh, no, we need immigration controls. Well, it's immigration controls themselves, the enforcement of them, that is resulting in the deportation of these DACA people that they're complaining about and the Salvadorians that they're now complaining about. All Trump's doing is enforcing the law that the left supports. Mm-hmm. And then on the right, you've got the conservatives saying we favor free markets and the free enterprise system. And well, what is open borders except free markets and the free enterprise system? It's just people interacting with each other on an economic basis. You've got employers that obviously want to hire immigrants. I mean, that's where they're raiding. They're not raiding the welfare offices because they often say, oh, the immigrants just come to America to get on welfare. It's just nonsense. There has never been a raid on a welfare office to get immigrants, illegal immigrants. At least I've never heard of one. The raids are always in private businesses, and they just now raided the 7-Eleven stores because people are working for a living. They're sustaining themselves. They're sustaining their families. I mean, there's something fundamentally wrong with this kind of system. And so your point about skin color shouldn't matter is absolutely right. But there's also the point of how should people treat their fellow man under biblical principles, religious principles, ethical principles, moral principles? And when you see the results of how this law is being enforced, you've got to instinctively think, this is not the right thing. There's just something fundamentally wrong with the system that causes so much suffering and pain for people. And when there is an alternative system, a free market system, that brings peace and harmony and happiness to people's lives.
Yeah, the other element, on this idea of race-based thinking is that think of the very way many progressives and certainly activists in the Democratic Party think about these issues from the perspective of their own political agenda. They think that the more Hispanics, the more blacks who are brought into the United States through their version of immigration law reform, the more likely it is that they'll have voter constituencies in the future. In other words, you would have the impression, though of course they would never think about this and say it, you would have the impression that they think that certain ethnic and racial groups are genetically prone towards democratic voting patterns. In other words, it is inherent in the genes that an Hispanic or an African votes for the Democratic Party for progressive agendas. That is not the case. Now, regardless of how a first generation may come, what about their children? Now, let me just mention a few names that many of them who would be viewed as conservative or certainly not progressive Democrats. Linda Chavez, who served in Ronald Reagan's administration. And by the way, a conservative who, by the way, if you read her comments on Facebook, is not pro-Trump, but believes in conservative principles as in the more limited government constitutional sense. Or even a congressman like a senator like Marco Rubio from Florida. He may not be a libertarian, but is he a wild-eyed, ranting and raving voting Democrat? I don't think so. You can go through the whole list of these. What about Walter Williams, Thomas Sowell, Clarence Thomas? Oh, this shows that people of African ancestry always are liberal Democrats. The fact is that people are individuals. They sometimes are misguided and uninformed about economics and history, but that crosses all racial and cultural lines. You cannot draw a conclusion that because someone's parents came from country X or part of the world Y and may have a particular ethnic or racial background, that therefore they're always going to vote the way that assures you power. Now, to be fair and balanced, to use a phrase, I have been at Republican events in which people have expressed their concerns about illegal immigration, and they don't want to talk about it. And it's always immigration from Latin America or Africa, but particularly Latin Americans. Why? Because they have their own paranoia. Oh my God, it's true. If Hispanics come, they're going to not only overwhelm us, but they're all going to be socialists. the conservatives and Republicans suffer from the same perverse race-based mindset of classifying, categorizing, and assuming that the genes dictate the ideologies you hold. I would beg to differ. My mother's family were Russian and Lithuanian Jews. My grandmother sang on a stage as a little girl at a campaign rally for Eugene V. Debs when he ran for president around the time of the First World War. She voted for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and she cried when he died in 1945. Hello? Those candidates and their views are not mine. I hope our viewers and listeners, if they listen to us regularly, notice that that is not my particular ideological inclination. It's not in the genes. It's not based upon race. It's not based upon any of that. It's how individuals think and perceive, learn, and there is indoctrination. There is propaganda. That's part of our case against state and government education. But each of us thinks on our own, and we can question and answer. And our genes do not dictate our future. And that includes our political views as well.
Yeah, it's so hard for me to understand why everybody doesn't support the concept of open borders, free trade, open immigration. I mean, every argument, Richard, as you point out, it's one of the keys to prosperity. I mean, this was one of the reasons why the United States was soaring in standard of living, especially in the late 1800s, because there were no immigration controls from the founding of the United States all the way up to, I think it was 1884, where they finally decided to keep Chinese out based on the fact that they were Chinese. They didn't look like Americans. And then the next one, I think, wasn't until 1924 or so. So for most of the 100 and some odd years, totally open immigration. That's our heritage. And as you point out, is even one of the immigration controls were one of the reasons for the Declaration of Independence. Yeah. Then you've got the utilitarian case. The free market works. It's the only thing that works. Socialist central planning will never work. There's no plan. So why devote one's efforts to trying to come up with a plan when you know in advance there is no plan that will work? And then you've got the racially colorblind type of system where open immigration doesn't depend on what the person's skin color is and quotas from different countries. And then, of course, there's the moral case for how man should treat his fellow man, to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the golden rule. So all the arguments argue for our position in favor of open borders, and seems to me, Richard, it's the only way to go.
I agree. The principles upon which this country was founded may not have always been practiced, and they may have been egregiously and hypocritically violated. Certainly, the issue of slavery, the way certain Indian tribes were treated, the way Asians were first looked at in the 19th century, which set off the first immigration barriers. But what is important is that the idea upon which this country is founded was that people were individuals first and collective groups second. When they say in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they do not say that these are rights that only white people have, that these are rights that only Englishmen have, as opposed to other settlers in the 13 colonies who came from Germany or France or Holland or. All men have these rights. Therefore, it is an appeal to the universal sense of what a human being is and should be. That is why, historically, the ideas of the Declaration of Independence have, in one way or another, stronger and weaker at different times, inspired multitudes of others around the world, because it is ecumenical, it is universal. It doesn't require ethnicity, race, history, or culture. It is saying that all men have these rights and should be respected in them. That is unique in America, and it has enabled us to slowly, imperfectly, with inconsistency, overcome the other inconsistent elements that we had. Slavery, Jim Crow, animosities towards Asians, different religious groups. But as long as the state either did not or increasingly was narrowed from doing so, that is, to discriminate, be biased against, exclude, Americans have found ways to, through interactions in the marketplace and the wider social arena, to learn that we are more alike as human beings than what separates us. That is the key to it. And if we follow that and understand that, then we easily see that looking to the future, I would hope that we would see immigration barriers and restrictions the same way that we look with surprise and disbelief and ununderstanding of, well, why would people have believed it was right to hold slaves? Why did people believe it was right to force Indians onto reservations, or to feel that you could easily steal their land? Or why would people even think like that? It's hard for us to sometimes imagine this. I would hope the day can come when we feel the same way about restrictions on the freedom to move.
I totally agree with you. And raising people's vision to a higher level of saying, hey, this is the ideal, and that ideal is achievable. Not perfectly always, as you point out. There were a lot of violations of liberty in the 19th century, but certainly achievable in the sense of no immigration controls at the very least. I should mention that many years ago, Richard, you and I co-edited. You were the primary editor. I kind of helped you. This great book called The Case for Free Trade and Open Immigration that FFF published. It's still in print. You can also get it in an ebook format. It's old, but it's timeless. And that if you want to explore these principles more thoroughly, I'd highly recommend getting the book. And also come to our website at fff.org. I think, Richard, we are, if not the leading...
One second here.
Okay.
We are. No
Richard,
reason.
come back.
Give yourselves a plug.
Oh, there you are. That's our book.
The Case for Free Trade and Open Immigration, edited by these two scoundrels and misanthropes. Oh, that means you and me, Jacob.
Yeah, that's our book. And Richard, you know, when we published this, I don't know, it was many, many years ago, I was really pleased with it because, as you know, we were holding lonely ground as we.
Oh, yes.
I mean, let's face it, FFF, I think, has been the leading figure in the case for free trade and open immigration in the libertarian movement. And it's one of the positions that I'm most pleased with, of having run this organization for 28 years. And you and I have been on this same page for the 30 years that we've known each other.
Yes. Yes, because it's ultimately the issue of what it means to be a free individual allowed to live their lives and peacefully interact with others for any purpose that does not involve violence or fraud. If those principles are followed, we not only have our own personal peaceful life, but we have a world of peace, harmony, and human betterment.
Right, and it's adhering to these principles of libertarianism and the principles of liberty that I think are going to lead us out of the morass. And I think it'll yet be the Americans, as bad off as we are, in so many areas: surveillance, national security state, assassination, regime change, welfare statism. I just have a hunch that it's yet going to be the American people who are going to lead the world out of this morass of socialism and interventionism and on to the highest reaches of freedom by dismantling all these socialist statist apparatuses that have caused so much misery and suffering and destruction of liberty and privacy. On that note, Richard, we're really out of time. We need to wrap it up. Greatly enjoyed the conversation. As always, come to our website at fff.org for more information. And Richard, I look forward to seeing you next week.
Until next time, I want to thank our viewers and listeners for once again joining us.